Theodore Shaw, class of 1976. Determined to fight for civil rights in America since your boyhood in the Bronx, you have become a national leader in the ongoing struggle. Thoughtful and creative, you are a tireless champion of racial and economic justice in our society. Over the decades, you have marched through America's tribunals, including the United States Supreme Court, elegantly championing the efforts to desegregate schools and oppose the death penalty. You have played a central role in the defense of affirmative action practices in higher education. To Wesleyan, you have been a very dedicated and reliable alumnus, twice serving as a trustee. In honor of your service to school and to the public good, the university's alumni awarded you the Baldwin Medal. Today, for your enduring commitment to making the United States a better place for all its citizens, Wesleyan, with great pride, confers upon you its Distinguished Alumnus Award. Congratulations. Thank you.
When I was asked to give some remarks, I struggled with what I would say. I generally don't read speeches, but something about this occasion made me write this out. And I'll probably half read it. Usually if I write it out, I don't even read it. But I do have some thoughts that I've reduced to writing. I said that I would talk about reflections on the continuing journey of Wesleyan's American Bicentennial class, privilege, opportunity, and debt. My wife, Helena, who just stepped out with our daughter, she said if I was speaking on today, that this really was doomsday. But I couldn't think of a better place to be on my last day on earth than Wesleyan. You know, they can just figure out a way, if anybody's left, those who are raptured before they go on up, they can roll the rest of us up to the hill and maybe put us in together. But I decided to talk about something else. I decided that I would, if you all forgive me, I would tell you a Wesleyan story, my story. We all have our own stories, and almost without exception, we're the heroes of our own story. And I always say that there's three sides to every story. And so I don't pretend to be objective, but I thought I'd talk about my story as a way of really talking about Wesleyan. And it starts with 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, I was a Catholic school student in New York City. And the Archbishop of the Diocese of New York at the time was Terence Cardinal Cook. For those of you who were exposed to Catholicism in New York at that time, I went to Catholic school for 12 years. I always say it was my salvation and my damnation. My salvation because of the education I got, my damnation because once those nuns get in your head, you never get them out. So, in his Catholic way, after the assassination of Dr. King and all of the violence that ensued, those of you who can recall know that our cities were on fire, as they had been for much of the decade of the 1960s. But Dr. King's assassination sparked urban unrest, uprising, violence. And Cardinal Cook decided, in his Catholic way, that he would do something about racial inequality and inequity. And he decided to start a program that was for young black men. It was sexist, it was for men. And the reason that it was for men was, again, in his Catholic way, what he wanted to do was really create a program that would produce more black priests. He looked around in Harlem and he wanted to find a priest to run the program. Black priests were few and far between, so he couldn't find one. But he did find a young white Irish American priest who had been assigned to a parish in Harlem by the name of John T. Meehan. And he asked him to run the program, and he consented. So he settled for this young white priest. And as it turned out, the first group of young men who were brought into the program made it clear that they were not really thinking about the priesthood. They weren't planning lives of celibacy. And they were not especially spiritual. At least we thought not at the time. What they were interested in was the black consciousness movement that had followed on the heels of the civil rights movement. And to his credit, Cardinal Cook decided to let the program continue, refocused. And Father Meehan figured out a way to make that work. He engaged some of the leading African American historians who were in the Harlem community and the surrounding environs. With them, consulting with them, they selected a canon of black history and literature, which those of us who were selected for the program were required to read and discuss and debate, to devour. We read, and sadly, I think some of these names may not be familiar to even those of us who are in this room who are well educated, but we read Lerone Bennett, Dr. John Hope Franklin, W.B. Du Bois, Kwame Nkrumah, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, James Baldwin and Langston Hughes, David Walker's Appeal, written in 1829, Frederick Douglass, Frantz Fanon, Marcus Garvey, and many others. We attended cultural events, including theater, political speeches, poetry readings, marches, and all things black. Father Meehan did not pretend to be what he was not, and he did not try to do what he could not. Sometimes he would bring us to events or bring lecturers and speakers to us, and he would discreetly disappear. We went on weekend retreats, debated the merits of the books we read, learned to speak publicly, mercilessly challenged each other and ourselves, committed ourselves to service to the communities from which we came. The Archbishop Leadership Project motto was excellence in all. I was in the second group of the Archbishop Leadership Project. I grew up in a public housing project in the Bronx after starting in Harlem. I attended Cardinal Spellman High School. Spellman was one of the most academically challenging Catholic high schools at that time. Its combined black and Latino enrollment was a little more than 10%, but in many ways the minority students were among the leaders at the school. My classmate, ranked first in my class, well ahead of me, was now Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who grew up in a housing project not far from mine. Several black students in the class ahead of mine were in the Archbishop's Leadership Project, which had a bit of a mystique about it because while its existence was not a secret, its members were pledged not to talk about it. Who was this young white priest who jauntily wore a black beret, an accessory identified at that time with the Black Panther Party, and who walked the streets of Harlem interacting with people of all stations of life, including the sacred and the profane? And I would walk the streets of Harlem with Father Meehan, and the hardest looking men, who obviously were entrepreneurs, would come up to him and be turned into altar boys when they interacted with him. Whoever he was, I wanted to be part of whatever he and the young men I knew were part of this thing were doing. So my selection for the Archbishop's Leadership Project was one of the most important moments and turning points of my life. In the spring of 1972, I was on the wait list for admissions to Wesleyan. I had heard about Wesleyan because two of the graduates of Spelman, two women, had enrolled a couple of years ahead of me, and an admissions recruiter came to Spelman. I applied late in January, I think it was, of the senior year, and I knew next to nothing about colleges. I had decided that I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, and I wasn't sure how to get there. My mother had died when I was 3. My father left my 2 sisters and me to live with my grandmother. My grandmothers took care of us until he reappeared, remarried, had 2 more children, and then he and my stepmother, after a few years, separated. My stepmother told me that I should go in the Air Force. She couldn't see how we were going to be able to afford college for me. She just didn't see that path. The light of opportunity didn't come to public housing projects in the Bronx, at least as shined by institutions like Wesleyan at the time. So, God bless her. She kept 5 children together on her own, struggled, but she didn't see college as a possibility. Inspired by all that I had learned in the Leadership Project, nonetheless, my mind was set on law school. The problem was I did not know how to get there. One day, standing outside of Father Meehan's church in Harlem, we were watching a tenement building down the street that was on fire, and the fire trucks had these hoses out in the street, and they were fighting this fire, and it was quite a spectacle. And he turned to me and said, so where are you going to go to college? What are you doing next year? And I said, well, I want to be a lawyer, and it seems to me that, I've been admitted to John Jay College of Criminal Justice, part of the city college system. That sounds like the way one becomes a lawyer. Any of you familiar with John Jay know it's actually where you go if you are a policeman or you want to study law enforcement, but it's not where you want to go if you become a lawyer, with all due respect. He said, where else have you been admitted? I said, well, I'm on the wait list of this place in Connecticut called Wesleyan. Have you been up there? No. Why not? Well, I don't have the money to go and no way to get up there. He said, we're going. And so we drove up the next week. It was a beautiful May day. The campus was absolutely beautiful. Not as beautiful, President Roth, as it is now. But it was seductive. I fell in love with the place instantly. Father Meehan told me to walk the campus. He went in to see one of the admissions officers. I don't know if anybody in this room would even remember his name. His name was Randy Miller. And he talked to Randy, and a few days later, I got a letter saying I was admitted. And a few days after that, a letter telling me that I had what amounted to a full scholarship at the time. I was on top of the world. And in fact, Wesleyan opened up the world for me. I formed a lifelong relationship with all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds, extraordinary people. I majored in CSS, was taught by extraordinary faculty, active in Ujamaa, the Black Students Organization, but also in other campus politics. I was mentored by people in Wesleyan's administration and on the faculty without even knowing that it was happening. I was one of the first 3 African American students to ever play on the basketball team for a full year. There was a lot of tension around sports in the basketball team. And I collected a record number of splinters, many of which are still lodged in a part of my anatomy today. I got my heart broken, learned hard lessons about life, about people, and about myself. I got on a plane for the first time after my junior year. I was on my way to East Africa to study in Tanzania. On the way over and back, I visited Brussels and Amsterdam and Paris, igniting a lifetime of world travel, which of course we know is the best form of education possible. While I was at Wesleyan, I also witnessed the first attacks on the kinds of programs that had made such a difference in my life, such as the Archbishop's Leadership Project. There was a young man by the name of Alan Roy Hollander who began to question Wesleyan's admissions practices, and it split the campus. It's very divisive. He challenged the university's efforts to enroll Black and Latino students, arguing that their, or more accurately, our, SAT scores and GPAs were lower than most white students. His assault on affirmative action, which precipitated a crisis atmosphere among students, particularly students of color, presaged the Bakke case, which went to the Supreme Court a few years later in 1978, and the Michigan cases in 2003, in which I was intimately involved in ways I won't take time to detail. I remember one evening inviting him to my room over in Lawn Avenue, and we had a long discussion, just he and I. Neither one of us changed the other's view, but I was struck by how sincere he was, no matter how much we disagreed. My Wesleyan graduation class graduated a little bit more than a month before the Bicentennial of the United States was celebrated. My dear friend, Robert Harold Thompson, was president of the class. He has long been the chaplain up at Exeter. My roommate, now famed jazz vibraphonist Jay Hogarth, played a song from the Broadway show The Wiz, Ease On Down the Road, at graduation. It was a beautiful day. I have a photograph signed by my teammate, Michael Dinella. On the back he wrote, "To my partner in the backcourt of life." For those of you who are basketball fans, you know how much that must mean. I left Middletown after graduation saddened, because I thought that most of my relationship with Wesleyan was behind me, that I would have that degree, its name would be associated with me for the rest of my life, but that it was over. I was wrong. I was active in the Black Alumni Council. I interviewed prospective students. I served on the Board of Trustees of Wesleyan for 15 years, and am now a trustee emeritus. I was on 2 presidential search committees. I can tell you that the second one, the last one, we sure enough got it right. The point is obvious. The relationship between a student and Wesleyan is relatively brief, 4 years, or for some a little bit longer. The relationship between an alumnus or alumni is a lifelong relationship. We belong to one another, Wesleyan and us. 35 years have flown by in a flash. In our mind's eye, we can remember the way we were as if it was yesterday. Yet, some of us are gone now. While most of us are still here, we're entering the fall of our lives. It is difficult to maintain perspective, but we are to the students graduating from Wesleyan tomorrow what the class of 1941, the Pearl Harbor class, was for us. Now, that means that they think we are old. I'm conscious of the fact when there's somebody from the class of 1937 here, he's snickering right now. Our Wesleyan is no longer here. There are places that were part of our daily lives at Wesleyan that no longer exist. And there are places that exist now that were not here when we were here and that we could only dream of. The campus looks better than ever. Wesleyan has had, I think, 3 presidents since our graduation and at least a couple of interim presidents. The world has changed. We now have the first black president of the United States, something that most of us could never foresee in 1976. The world has changed since 9/11. On July 4th, 1976, a little bit more than a few weeks after graduation, I watched Operation Sail and the Bicentennial fireworks from what was then landfill in what is now Battery Park City, in the shadow of the World Trade Centers. For years, a large photograph of me, and this is certainly immodest, so forgive me, hung in North College along with photographs of Martin Luther King and J. Hogarth and Chuck Stone and other alum. Martin Luther King had an honorary degree, so we can claim him, I think. A few years ago, I unexpectedly received a picture in the mail, thoughtfully forwarded from University Relations when the exhibit was retired. I thought it was telling that I was going the way of the Twin Towers, but that is the way of time. Some people tell me that Wesleyan has changed in ways that are more significant than wall displays. I know from my days on the board that we struggled with our identity as a little university. We struggled with our image and with our realities. We struggled with the endowment that, while by most measures was strong, was increasingly not strong enough to keep us in place as compared to some of our peers. Wesleyan needs more financial support. As compared to some of its peers, we are not the wealthy institution we want to be. I wish that I had more money, but it didn't come to me by being a civil rights lawyer. So I do the best I can with what I have. Yet it's been long my view that Wesleyan should not try to be Williams or Amherst. To borrow from and to paraphrase a political pundit's observations from partisan politics, if you give the people a choice between Wesleyan between Amherst or Williams, and Wesleyan trying to be Amherst or Williams, people will choose Amherst or Williams every time. While over the years I've sometimes witnessed the narcissistic and self-destructive excesses of some in the Wesleyan community who have political peculiarities, I hope that Wesleyan does not eschew the kind of edginess that gives its distinctive vibrancy and character. I hope that financial strength does not mean playing it so safe that the institution stops taking risks. Wesleyan was ahead of the curve when it began to admit significant numbers of black and Latino students in the late 60s and early 70s. The rest of the nation has caught up. But in the meantime, Wesleyan became uncomfortable with its reputation as diversity university. But it was on the right side of history when it pursued diverse enrollment. I was on the board of Wesleyan when we debated divestment from companies that did business in South Africa, and while I came to understand the merits of that debate with more nuance than when I was a student, I advocated for divestment. Wesleyan was on the right side of history on that issue. Wesleyan has not always gotten it right, none of us do, but it has gotten it right more often than not, and I am proud to be a Wesleyan alum. A few weeks ago, my wife and I, who just left, you know what that means, I've gone on way too long, we attended Father Meehan's retirement party. I was not the only Leadership Project member to attend Wesleyan. Following me became a young man in the class of '79, Peter Sanders, and then a flood of alum of the Leadership Project. The program became co-ed in 1980s, and so there were young women who came to Wesleyan. Father Meehan returned to this campus time and time again, taking students up to Wesleyan. We can't count how many students from the Leadership Project came to Wesleyan. And it wasn't only Wesleyan. Alum of the Leadership Project attended Ivy League universities and other universities around the country. Father now, Monsignor Meehan, sent them there. And they are now doctors and lawyers, professors, businessmen and women, law enforcement officers, teachers, professionals of all stripes. Many are simply good, solid people who serve their families and their community well. And one who holds a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD from MIT became a Jesuit priest. In a few weeks, he will return to Harlem, and he will be installed as the pastor of St. Charles Borromeo Church in the heart of Harlem, where Father Meehan once served. As for me, I am deeply grateful for this honor, but last night, as I prepared my remarks, I called Father Meehan. I told him that I was passing Wesleyan's Distinguished Alumni Award, at least the jacket and the what's in it, on to him, because I've been rewarded by Wesleyan enough, just by my education here. I am rewarded by Wesleyan every day and my affiliation with it. I love this institution, and I love so many of the people who are affiliated with it. Nancy, I, unlike many people, needed more practice in marriage. And so I finally married the woman, as you know, whom I dated for many years, said I wasn't going to get married again, and we have 2 young children. So while the other 2 escaped you, my son, as you know, went to Morehouse. My daughter's going to Barnard in the fall. These 2, they, I hope, won't escape you. That's your successor. God bless you all. Godspeed. God bless Wesleyan. And thank you for enduring remarks that are a little longer than they should have been.